Hello everybody. Welcome to my little tutorial on how I make my potting soil. This can also be applied to raised bed soil by just simply introducing vermiculite to the mix as well, which I'll go over shortly. You're going to need a few items for this. First off, you're going to want a bucket. With the amounts that I'm using, we'll end up with about 20 to 30 gallons of soil. So I have a 27-gallon bucket here. The first thing we're going to need is 2.2 cubic feet of peat moss. Next, we'll need about 1 cubic feet of compost of your choice. I personally like Black Cow. Next, any all-purpose granular fertilizer, preferably organic, preferably granular. You'll also need some perlite. I know a lot of people don't like Miracle-Gro. This is simply just perlite though. Lastly, you'll need some water. Take your bucket. We'll be adding the contents of this into the bucket. Take note that I did not use the entire bag of peat moss here. Maybe about 2/3 of the bag. Only reason for that is because I'm used to mixing in a 50-gallon. It's not rocket science with the measurements here. I just like to say about halfway full with whatever bucket you're using. Trust me, the proportions aren't as important as you would think. First thing you might notice whenever you go through this peat moss, a little bit of sticks. Not going to hurt your plants, just a little bit annoying to work with, especially if you're working with smaller containers. If you'd like, you can go through and pick out all the junk, but as we move on, you'll notice that it's not that important, especially as the season goes on. You might also notice this peat moss is very dry. Really depends on the way that you get it from the store. Notice how it can't clump up into a snowball, it just falls apart. That's why we have the water. Peat moss can hold a lot of water, but we still don't want to flood the bucket. I would say about 2 gallons per 2 cubic feet. We're going to let that sit for a few minutes. Right now we're hydrating the peat moss. This makes it a little bit easier for us. Now that our peat moss is hydrated, notice how it clumps up a little bit better now. You'll find that it is quite clumpy, and it's holding quite a bit of water. This alone will not take care of your plants. That's why we need to add some other stuff. Next, we're going to be adding the Black Cow compost. By the way, your hands are about to get pretty dirty. Since we have a fairly small bucket here, I got another bucket. Next, we'll go ahead and just add the Black Cow to our compost mix here. Once again, I didn't use the full bag here. And like I said, it's not rocket science. Nature doesn't measure. Notice we got some clumps here in the compost. We definitely want to break these up. In the case of Black Cow, try to just ignore the fact that you're breaking up pieces of cow poop. Give it a mix. These smaller clumps, don't really worry about them. They'll break up as we keep going. Now in my case, I have a very non-homogeneous structure here. What I'm going to do is pour this mixture into the next bucket, which will mix up the compost and perlite. You can do this whichever way you want. I like to do things like a madman. So now we have a nice mixture of peat moss and compost. Considering the size of the amount of potting soil that I'm looking to make right now, I only have 1 bag of perlite. I'm actually going to go ahead and only use half of this peat moss compost mixture. So I'll be splitting these 2 buckets here. Much better. Hopefully this will make it easier for me to mix and easier to show you exactly how it's mixed. So just to recap, right now we have 2 containers with the same exact mix. This is basically an even mix between sphagnum peat moss and compost. That's all we have so far. Now we're going to go ahead and add 8 quarts of perlite. The perlite has been added. Note the material. It's almost like very, very tiny packing peanuts. We're going to be mixing this in, but we might as well put the fertilizer in as well. This is arguably the most important part to your mix in terms of if you care if your plants grow or not. I always like to look at the instructions despite the fact that it's organic. This particular blend says that you should use 1/4 cup of fertilizer per 5 gallons of soil. So in that case, that's going to be about 3/4 of a cup to 1 cup of fertilizer. Remember, it's not rocket science. A note on fertilizer. There's multiple brands out there that do the same thing. I personally just really like the Dr. Earth brand. I like the way the fertilizer looks, smells, and I like the way that it grows my plants. I've been using this for years. So like I said, what we're going to do, we're going to put in about 1 cup. We're going to eyeball it. That's probably a bit more than 1 cup, but I think it'll be just fine. Now we're going to mix this together. I personally like to get a very good deep mix, and I'm actually going to stop the video so I can get both hands in here. If this mixture looks familiar to you, chances are you've opened up a bag of potting soil in your life. A few things we want to see. We want it to slightly clump together like this. Not super tight. Maybe a little like a dry snowball. If it doesn't clump together like this, just add a little bit more water. You're okay. Now, I mentioned I would add a note about the perlite. The only thing in this mix is peat moss, compost, perlite, and fertilizer. This is for potted plants. If you wanted to do this for a raised bed garden, I recommend you add an equal amount of another product called vermiculite. I'll make a later video about raised bed soil and vermiculite. However, for my purposes, the last few years I've found that this mixture works perfectly for all potted plants, whether it be tomatoes, potatoes, lettuce, flowers, eggplants, peppers, anything. I hope this video helped you guys, and of course, we'll see you next time.